Hello everyone, this is Josh Epstein, Marketing Specialist for the TDA Perks program. I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Our topic today is how to avoid common pitfalls of dental construction projects. Presenters today is Mr. Johnny Shepardson, and he's with Xite Healthcare Real Estate. So before we get going, I'd like to just mention that Perks, we offer over 25 endorsed vendors that members can take advantage of. We also offer educational articles. All of our webinars are archived, and we also offer podcasts. I'd also like to inform everyone that in June, we'll be kicking off our new office symposiums for new dentists. We've got them all in June, the 3rd, 10th, and 17th. Are you attending TEDx meeting? If you are, be sure to register for Perks-sponsored classes that focus on both practice startups and practice transitions. So there will be a Q&A period at the conclusion of our session. And without further ado, I will pass the presentation over to Johnny.
Thank you very much. We're going to let the screen transition here real quick. And we will get this up. Okay. All right. As Josh said, my name is Johnny Shepardson. I'm with Xite Project Management. We're a subsidiary of Xite Realty. And I appreciate all of you in attendance today. And I will try to make this as easy as possible for everyone. And as Josh mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the conclusion of this presentation. And if for some reason we can't answer all those questions during this phone call, I am very available following the phone call at any time, and I have my information here for you guys as well. So as Josh said, this is how to avoid common pitfalls in dental construction projects. We're going to first start with just kind of a general overview of Xite Healthcare Real Estate and Xite Project Management. So Xite Project Management is a Texas-based commercial project management firm focused on servicing the needs of healthcare professionals. We have an extensive portfolio of developed and managed healthcare projects. The company has the experience and the resources to handle physicians' project program management needs. Our typical dental projects range from finish out of vacant space to ground-up developments. Xite Project Management is able to give dentists the confidence in their decision to relocate, expand, renovate, or open a new practice. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Johnny Shepardson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Project Management and Development. We are based here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Richardson specifically. I have a degree in industrial technology, specifically construction management. I have over 15 years of experience in the construction real estate realm across the Texas market. I actually owned and operated my own general construction company, specializing in medical. That was our focus, but we did have a broader focus on general development and ground-up construction, from retail, education, general office, or restaurant, condo developments. So this broad experience brought me into contact with Xite Realty in my past. And what we came to figure was we were able to serve our clients on the real estate front and in the real estate world very well. And we felt like there was an underserved portion of this market that once we satisfied the real estate piece, we kind of left the clients to their own resources to get their projects complete. So combining our efforts, we really felt like we're giving our clients the best resources moving forward through the delivery of their project. The next slide is a representative project. So these are just a small sampling of some of the projects that we've done or that I've done specifically with Xite as well. You'll see a lot of urgent care, freestanding emergency centers, and you'll also see some dental and some other projects in here. And the reason I show this is a good sampling of the types of projects that we're able to do across the Texas market, from interior finish to ground-up construction, and we definitely have the experience here as a project management firm. So we're going to talk a little bit about typical business planning considerations, and I know everyone on the phone call here is at different stages in their career. You may be a current owner of a practice, you may be an associate in a practice, and that's fine. But what this really does is it sets the stage for the direction that you're wanting to go. And these are all considerations that anyone should have during the initial buying phase of the real estate, and then well into the construction phase, of course. You may be wanting to do a startup. You may be in an existing practice. You may have considered, are you going to own your new practice, or are you just going to lease the space and run your practice within that? I'm saying all these things, they tie very well into the next slide, so we'll hit on these last few, but the property location and type. Are you moving into an office building? Is it going to be a professional office park, a medical campus, retail? There are so many things to consider, but all of these are very viable. And I don't tell you this to necessarily scare you, but I do tell you this to set the stage for how much involvement and commitment of time is involved moving forward in a new direction. So all this kind of ties together. So no matter where you are in your career, what type of dentist you are, where you're looking to relocate your practice, or what type of property you desire, whether you want to own or lease, or your dental office construction, can be summarized in 3 scenarios. So the tone of this presentation is going to be geared around 3 different scenarios, the first of which is redevelopment of vacant space. There's a few different scenarios within this vacant space, and we'll touch on these specifically. Second scenario would be new development, so ground-up construction from a raw piece of dirt. And then the third would be renovation of current practice. So we feel like this is a great sampling that really suits the needs for everyone on this call and gives you all a little bit of a taste of what you can expect, or some of these obstacles and hurdles that you might encounter across or through the projects. So as we move into the next one, what I'm going to show you is the scenario 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to see a similarity here. The 4 phases of this process: the planning, the feasibility, the pre-construction, and the construction. All 3 of these scenarios are very similar in that regard. You'll notice some small changes. The biggest difference is going to be the items below these subcategories of each one of these major categories. You'll notice very clearly on the renovation of current space, the demobilization is highlighted in yellow, and we'll definitely cover that one in detail as well. So scenario 1, as we move through this specifically, is going to take a little bit longer than some of the other ones because we're going to cover all 4 aspects of it and some of the hurdles or pitfalls, if you will, that you'll encounter across the process. So as we move into scenario 2 and 3, it'll be a little bit shorter. So scenario 1, redevelopment of a vacant space. I think you're all probably sitting there on the other end of this phone call with a vision in your mind of what a vacant space is. And this picture here kind of lends itself to what is typically thought of as a vacant space. There may be a demising wall, or the wall that separates the 2 spaces like you see here. But something that some people don't consider is you may occupy, let's just say, for instance, an old telephone store or a donut shop. So there may be some demolition that may be involved in that, and we're going to touch on that a little bit too. So vacant space can mean a number of things. And one thing it could also mean, a third version of this, is maybe it's a brand new construction that hasn't completed construction yet. We'll talk a little bit about that too, but it would end up looking like this, so there's some considerations to take there too. So we talked about the planning, the feasibility, the pre-construction, and the construction of a redevelopment of a vacant space. You'll see that there's some subcategories within each one of these. We're going to look at each one of these individually. Let's jump into the planning phase of this. Obviously, we say planning. I'm hoping that we've identified a piece of real estate by this point, or a space. We're going to want to jump into the space planning. We'll define the leasable area, or the usable square footage versus the leased footage. So something that I'm going to bring up very quickly, we're going to talk about is one of the situations that arises in dental construction and medical construction and any type of construction. You see the common area, and I think you can probably see my pointer, I'm hoping, where we say common areas, usable footage versus leased footage. So depending on how big you want your space, and we're talking about this new construction here, let's just say you have 2,500 square feet, and you're thinking you can put 5 or 6 ops in this space, and that's great. A lot of times when we go in here to do the space planning, what we're not taking into consideration that 2,500 square feet is maybe common area. Maybe it's a vestibule, or maybe it's a common access area that's included in that footage, and it very dramatically affects your ability on how many ops or how much you can actually build or design within your space. So this is a very important part of the feasibility and the planning portion of construction and in your future expansion into this space to take into consideration. There's nothing more terrible than moving into planning after you've solidified your lease and you're about to start paying rent and you realize, oh my gosh, I can't build what I want. So we want to avoid that pitfall, and that happens, and it happens often if you're not prepared and ready to deal with that. Design need versus want programming, again, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward as far as what you actually need versus what's in your mind and what you want. Having a good team behind you and directing you through this process, kind of giving you some suggestions of, hey, I know you want 5, but let's start with 3 and prepare for 2 more in the future on the ops. Those are very valid things to consider, and too often they get overlooked. Confirming dimensions, whether it's demising walls, the interior clear dimensions, or structural columns and walls, all of these play a role in your interior space plan. As you can see in the picture in the top right, you'll see some actual metal structure or steel structural columns. You'll see some beams and some other structures. This is what happens to be a wood and steel frame structure. All of these components, if not taken into account when you're doing your space plan could be phenomenal, but it may not work because there could be a column right in the middle of your hygiene area. All of these types of things really need to be confirmed in the field before you move into your plans and specifications to move to construction. Easily identified, but they're also very easily overlooked if the time isn't taken to look at those things. Likewise with demising walls. Demising walls, like I said prior, are the walls that separate the space from your space to the neighbor's space. Couple scenarios here that we see. One, the landlord may be responsible for building this wall, or the wall may already be in place. It may not be exactly where the plans show given to you from the landlord, but we want to make sure of that. So we want to make sure that your square footage isn't compromised because of that. Likewise, we want to make sure that your general contractor is not charging you on top of what your landlord's already delivered for this demising wall. So I'll tell you what happens a lot of times is a contractor will get a set of plans or space plan from your team, and they'll propose a bid offering to you on how much the construction will be. And in that, they're going to make the assumption either that demising wall is there or it is not there. And they may base this off of information that you've provided from the landlord, and they may not. But I ask yourself this, what do you think the likelihood of getting credited back from the general contractor for that demising wall if it's already in place if you don't know that they've also bid for that? So again, these are, I say they're small. They're not necessarily small, but they're definitely a monetized amount that goes along with that. The bottom picture here I want to show you is kind of confusing, but what this is a saw cut in the concrete. So they actually cut the concrete out here to run electrical lines. And you see right here, this is actually a high voltage electric line serving the space next door to this medical user. And the general contractor cut through this line. Thank heavens he was not injured, but it did sever the power to the space next door. And I show you this to show you that there are unforeseen obstacles that happen in many construction projects. This electrical line was on no set of plans, was not pre-designated by the landlord or the developer, and they went back and wanted to charge the general contractor. Our involvement and the contractor's foresight into this, knowing that this was not located on any plans, we were actually able to have the landlord cover this cost. But if they didn't have the foresight, or we didn't have the ability to deal with the landlord and know that we had structured this deal the way we did up front, this could have cost tens of thousands of dollars, down business time or lost time from the business next door, not to mention rerunning all the electrical and power lines. So let's move to this next one real quick. So needs assessment. One very important part, and a lot of times our clients don't ask this if we're not involved in this, and they may ask themselves, you know, what am I expecting cost-wise? How long is this going to take? Have I considered my image or my visibility from the exterior of my space? Do I have any special access considerations? I'll give you an example. Same thing with licensing considerations. Maybe you're an ambulatory dental facility or something similar. A lot of our ER clients have the same consideration. Is there access to the space within this leasable area for me to have a patient drop-off or patient pickup or even ambulatory pickup or delivery? Likewise with licensing considerations. If the Texas Department of Health has some specific requirements for the space, will this space meet those needs? All of these things are very important questions that need to be asked up front, but unfortunately are not always asked. Imagine putting yourself in a situation of closing on the rent or on the space and paying rent, and not actually having an access or landlord not allowing you to add a canopy over a patient drop-off or pickup area. That's devastating. Likewise with future expansion, we kind of talked a little bit about your space needs, your needs versus your wants. You may have grandiose plans that you currently only need 3 operatories, but you want to move to 5, and you want to have some more hygiene areas, or you want to expand into another focus or have a partner that you bring on. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that and those considerations are taken into account before we move into construction. So we're going to move into feasibility, and like I said, we're going to talk about planning and feasibility pretty extensively in the first section, but as we move into section 2 and 3, they're going to be repetitive of this, so we're not going to cover those in detail. But we definitely want to talk about the feasibility, whether it's parking or zoning. I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here. So what you're looking at is a space plan that we created for one of our clients. It was a prior storage area, so we're looking at current versus future requirements. Is there going to be a change in the use, and would the square footage be affected? And let me tell you why that is, and that ties directly into zoning with the change of use and what that process is. This building happened to be within the same zoning. It was all commercial, which medical and general office fit into, and that's great. But when you have a storage facility, your parking requirements are dramatically lower than they would be for general medical or general retail. So we want to make sure that the site can park adequately. There would be nothing worse than having this space drawn, purchased, and ready to go, and the city come back and tell you, hey, it's great that you want to put a 5,000 square foot dental office in this location. However, you can't park enough cars on this site, so you can't build a dental office. I'd like to tell you that's never happened, but I know of many cases where it has. I'm going to give you a second example. Again, with proper planning, you can avoid this, not allowing yourself to go into closing before all of these items are answered. Second example is a dental user in a general office tower. The parking requirements for general office within this municipality were about half of what it would be for medical or dental use within this space. Landlord rented them the space, they went to construction, they built the space out, and then they realized they couldn't get their final certificate of occupancy from the city because their parking was not met. But thank goodness they were able to reach a compromise with the city and the landlord due to their situation and come out of that relatively unscathed. But again, you talk about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on interior finishes, not to mention lost practice and rent as well. That too can be devastating. So all of this can be avoided from the proper planning up front in the feasibility phase. Another piece that I definitely want to touch on, and again, it is a little bit scary, but asbestos and structural considerations. So we'll start with asbestos real quick. There is a misconception in the market today in the construction field that asbestos surveys or investigation to see if asbestos is in the space that you're occupying is not required on buildings over built from 1990 and later. That is a false assumption, and we have a situation where there was a general contractor moved into a space, did not perform the asbestos investigation. Texas Department of Health inspector happened to be driving by, came into the space, asked them for their asbestos investigation and their notice of demolition filed with the state. It was not in place. There are heavy penalties and fines from the state of Texas for failure to notify. So again, this is something that is required by the state on every project that requires any sort of demolition, and it is one that continually bites general contractors and clients who don't know about this in advance. The next piece is going to be structural. So talk about determining the foundation, the flexibility of the exterior or exterior facade improvements. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of this and why this is important. This is going to look familiar. So I mentioned in the last slide that this was a storage facility. So here's that same location. And the vision of this client was to turn this into a beautiful dental office. And when you first look at this location, you think there's no way to do that. So architecturally, it's very easy to draw the image that the client wants, and that's great. But it's your team's responsibility, or your project management team, or your team and the lack thereof, responsibility to make sure that can the structure support the vision of the client or the architect. So what we did is we went in, we did a foundation or structural inspection on this facility. We determined that, A, the foundation was not adequate to support additional structure, but we determined what steps were needed to be taken. So now we've also identified what type of cost implications we have before we even close on the site. So I'm going to show you the vision now. The vision was this, and what we've determined with the structural modifications that we were going to do, and with the investigation that we did, and the coordination with the city, and all the due diligence pieces that we've done, that this is a completely viable project, and we're able to move to construction, and they are moving to construction next month. So in lack of preparation of this, you could be blindsided with significant structural changes or the inability of the structure itself to support what your vision is, and then you have to go back to the drawing board, which none of us wants to do. I'm going to show you a second example of the same thing, but the reason I show you this one is to show you the amount of structural work that goes into a project when you're modifying it from an existing space. So some of you might be familiar with this space. This is in Dallas. It was an old liquor store, and this was the before. So this is during construction. So what we want to do, we didn't want to modify the footprint, but we definitely wanted to give it a more of an expansive feel and a tower feature, if you will, to create a presence on this corner. And you can see the amount of steel and infrastructure that goes into just creating this front facade. And there's obviously an intrinsic or associated cost with this, and we want to make sure no one's blindsided with this, but that the feasibility is discovered before we move to construction and that everyone's comfortable with it. And then this is the final product. So you can also see how going from, I'm going to call it the pig and this is the lipstick, but going from a box to a beautiful facility is absolutely achievable with proper planning. The other thing to consider when you're going into an existing space, and this is going to hold true throughout the construction other phases, but service availability. Is there adequate water and sewer service size to your facility, or electric load capacities, or is there going to be required fire suppression? I'm going to give you an example of this. You go into a space and you make dramatic improvements like you saw on the slide with the liquor store. The city can very easily come back to you and say, well, you've modified the use and you brought the building up by so many dollars in improvements. Now we're going to require you to add fire suppression to this building. All of these things can mean tens of thousands of dollars in lost time without the prior or proper preparation. Those are three big P's in advance to get this identified. Same thing with electrical load capacities. You're adding a pano, or you might be adding some other X-ray equipment throughout your facility or other high electrical need equipment. A lot of retail spaces are set up for 200 amp service, where most of our dental suites are going to be 400 amp plus. While it's not super difficult in some situations to upgrade, in other situations it's extremely difficult. Space limitations in the panel, accessibility to bringing in additional electrical service, or even sometimes other transformers to the site, not to mention the landlord may or may not let you make those modifications. So those are all valid considerations, very easily overcome or avoided with the proper preparation and having a great team in place. We put this item on here on utility services because it's definitely something you want to think about. You don't want to be thinking about it at the last minute. You're going to have 100 other things: staffing, opening your facility, getting your patients coordinated, not wanting to negotiate electrical contracts. That's a very easy thing, but it's definitely something that's time consuming, not to mention your IT needs and support. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here on a few more slides, but have you considered what phone systems? Who's going to do all your support? What about your billing? Some of you already have this in place, but some of you do not. MEP maintenance. Will your landlord maintain your heating and ventilation system, or your air conditioning and heating? That's what the MEP is referring to here in this situation. And likewise with your franchise utility, setting up your electric, water, and we already talked about electric, but your water, gas, and sewage, and your trash. So all of these things, if you're caught with it at the last minute, it's not comfortable. We want to make sure that you guys avoid that too. Here's the specific slide on the low voltage design. So this is a little bit more specific from just IT considerations, and it says data cabling and then tertiary to that TV service and locations. I want to just bring to your attention the situation of not having a proper IT or data cabling plan in advance of the construction so that you can move to construction and wire properly. Here's an example. Client was not aware of what phone system they wanted to use. They decided that they needed, and I'm going to say category 5, which is a typical telecommunication or internet type or phone type cabling. Did not know how many pairs or wires they needed to run to each location. They said to go with one wire. What ended up happening was the phone system they used required 2 to every location. It seems simple, but now we're cutting sheetrock, or they're pulling more wires and disrupting you, and it's time, money, and inconvenience that can be avoided very easily. Not to mention, setting up your franchise utilities can take anywhere from 60 to 90 days. So we want to make sure that, if your construction time is only 90 days, we want to make sure you're not in and operating and you don't have phone or power service to your space. And then we put a comment on here about architecture, interior layouts, MEP design, and civil site plans. Obviously, we want to have all of these complete before we move to construction. But if we haven't, as we'll talk about in the bid negotiation, if we haven't started making these considerations early and go ahead and vetting this process out, in some cases you can lose anywhere from 30 to 60 days very easily. One of the other pieces when you go into an existing space you want to consider is HVAC warranty. A lot of times there's existing HVAC systems on the building, and we want to make sure that someone is tested for that, made sure that they're adequate for your space and for your needs. And we also want to ask, is the landlord going to be responsible for this maintenance? Is the landlord going to be responsible for supplying new units if indeed they are not adequate or in proper function? And then what warranty they're going to provide or not provide. Those are all very valid questions, but they can come back and bite you very quickly, and I'm going to show you some examples. Same thing with the roof and the waterproofing. I'm also going to show you some horror stories on this. Many cases the landlord is going to warrant, in most cases, let's put it this way, is going to warrant the roofing system on your building that you're moving into. They're also going to require that your general contractor, whoever you choose, is going to use their approved roofer, and that's to maintain the warranty on the building. There are many cases where general contractors void your warranty and you're stuck paying that bill. We don't want that to happen. And then determine shell waterproofing pitfalls. So I want to jump in real quick to show you some examples of HVAC issues and roofing and waterproofing issues. What we're looking at here, I'm going to use my pointer. This is the inside coil of an existing air conditioning unit on a space that landlord said was adequate. Very easily caught by a HVAC company, came out and did a site survey for us, that the coil was indeed, it was rusted, and here's the big M word, it was full of mold. No one wants that blowing through their facility. Had we moved to construction, planned on this being a part of the construction and being in place and existing, general contractor wouldn't have included it in their budget. We wouldn't have included it in our budget. Our client would have included it, and they would have been stuck paying thousands of dollars for a new air conditioning system for their space. So identifying this early run is very integral. This next picture is going to be a little bit difficult for everyone to see, so I'm going to explain this. This is a vertical wall in a space, and we're looking up at a roofing system. And you can clearly see where the insulation was torn out. But I show you this because this is a building where the landlord is quote-unquote warranting the roof. There was a roof leak prior to construction. General contractor noticed it, pulled the insulation out, and what we exposed was what I'm going to use as a simple explanation as a patch job over an inadequate roof system. And we'll look at this picture next to us, and you may wonder what that is. Here's what that is. It is a Band-Aid to conceal what I'm going to call, again, the inadequate roofing system. So I show you this because it was covered with insulation, and a lot of this, despite everyone's best efforts, is not going to be able to see this. The important part of this is that the landlord was identified early on and before we moved into lease that they were going to warrant and maintain this roof. And that's indeed the case. But I just show you this to tell you and to show you that this happens, and it happens regularly across the state and in the different markets. The final piece of this, we talked about some of the waterproofing situations or roof situations, is also window systems. So traditionally, you'll see a lot of retail like you see in this picture with a storefront system. Many of you might be operating in a situation like this currently. Storefront systems don't always operate or perform like maybe a residential window in your home. We have seen and heard of very many situations where you have water leak and penetrations into your space. They can happen early, which would be fortunate, so we could catch them and have a landlord resolve that if they're willing to. Or they could be even more of a detriment, and you could be a week before you open your facility. We have rain events like we've had over the last 30 days, and your space floods, and that happens. And we want to make sure that this is done up front with the landlord, that they are responsible for these window systems. I've just had plenty of bad experiences, even in my construction days, of how these windows are improperly or properly installed and how they're maintained. Final piece that we're going to tile this back to is GC selection and negotiation. We've talked about some horror stories. We've talked about some situations that can be easily avoided through prior preparation. But one good way to do this, if you have a project management team in place or someone that can handle this bid negotiation and solicitation, is starting with a competitive and competent pool of general contractors after you have your preliminary designs and everything in place. Putting it out for competitive bid negotiation, you're avoiding excessive cost, you're avoiding these duplications of costs, all of these things that we've talked about previous to this. And then conducting a pre-bid conference on site. It's amazing what bidding general contractors can find while they're on site in a space, and they'll communicate to you. And a lot of times in this situation, they'll be your best friend and point out situations that you can bring up with the landlord as well. And then a comprehensive analysis of these bids and their scopes of work. So we happen to use a proprietary, we'll call it an apples-to-apples comparison of bid documents. We have a bid template that we use that keeps everyone in line and also helps us identify anomalies. So getting the best general contractor qualification-wise, but then also getting the best bang for your buck, if you will. It's better to start fresh and have the right team in place. And then review and award on behalf of the owner. Again, that's what a project management team will do for you, is be your advocate in these situations. And the good part about having a project management team that also has construction experience is making sure that they can raise the flag, if you will, when the situation is warranted. We've done this. We've been around the block. That's a very important part of your team. So scenario 2, like I said, will go a little bit quicker, as will 3. So scenario 2 is a new development. And you'll see in the photo here, this is a new development. This is a ground-up project from dirt. And I just use this as an example so I can paint the picture in your mind. Again, you see that the process, and we call this ground-up specific just for the presentation here to make this clear, is still the planning, the feasibility, or the pre-development. The construction of the site and shell is different. And then the construction portion is a little bit different. There's just a few more pieces that go into this puzzle. So I'm going to jump into the construction site and shell portion of this. So imagine, if you will, we're looking at a raw piece of land, which is in this picture at the bottom. It says site. This happens to be a site that we did the investigation on, so we're familiar with this. Plenty of examples here. So this is in the San Antonio market. You'll see an abundance of trees here. And then you'll see how we were going to put this project onto the site. One of the considerations we want to look at, and maybe not specifically in this market, but many markets, is floodplain. Delineation of the 100-year flood line, doing topographic surveys, determining if on-site detention is required or not. Does it need to be rezoned? Does it need to be replatted? Oh my gosh, what if it does? What are the implications? How much time is this going to take to get this done, and does this fit in my budget of time and capital? So we do the test fit, we identify all these pieces, and we do this as a form of insurance before you go hard on your money on this piece of dirt. You know that when you close on this piece of dirt that the feasibility is satisfied and you can indeed move to construction. So I mentioned the trees, and I mentioned those specifically. One of these items here is tree mitigation. Tree mitigation in many markets means that the municipality will require you, if you demolish a tree off the site, that you either A, have to pay a fee per what we call caliper inch, or the size around the trunk of the tree, across the thickness of the tree, a dollar amount per every inch that you remove from that site, or you have to replace it. That can be devastating on some of these sites that have old growth trees that you have to remove, and it may kill a deal very quickly. It almost did on this one, and a compromise was reached, but I will tell you that you can get very far along in a process like this and forget about the tree mitigation, or even worse, in some cases, the tax and rollback tax implications. For instance, if this site had been zoned agricultural of some sort, like farmland, and you came in and put a commercial or a medical site on this, they could roll your taxes back on 5 years in some cases, and you paid back taxes on that amount. So typical or terrible situation. I want to back up real quick to this floodplain. I want to mention something to you guys. So floodplain and delineation of the 100-year floodplain is very critical. And I'm going to back up even further verbally here and tell you about the occupying an existing space. You may think, I'm moving into this space that used to be a telephone store. Surely there's no issues with floodplain. I'm going to give you a specific example. There was a building in Texas that client occupied because they improved the amount of the building by more than 50% of its value. It enforced a code within FEMA that required, because they were bordering a floodway or floodplain, that they had to bring the building up 12 inches above grade. Now, initially that sounds bad, and it is bad, but what's even worse is there was other occupants in the building. It could have completely killed the deal had we not identified this early on and seeked a remedy for this. But I'm only telling you this on the ground up portion because it is excessively important that that's identified as well. The picture I'm showing you now is actually an example. This is not floodplain, but this goes back to the proper floodway planning and site planning of a site. What you're seeing here is a civil engineer's, I'm going to say best attempt, or attempt at the way he wanted this site to drain. It very clearly did not. You can see a sump pump sitting here in the back of this space. It's flooded the space a couple of times. This is just a bad situation from a civil engineer. Now, the remedy here is that they're on the hook for the cost of this. Had the planning been monitored up front through the construction process, I would say the situation wouldn't have happened. But it is an unfortunate oversight by the civil engineer and the general contractor. This is a client friend of ours, so we have very intimate knowledge on this situation, but we don't want this to happen to any of you guys either. Another portion of the construction site and shell through the feasibility period would be ALTA survey, which is just a more detailed version of a land survey. And then title. That goes directly into the title commitments, go into the survey. Platting considerations we hit a little bit earlier. Do we have to replat this, and if so, how long will that take? Are there easements that affect this site? I want to show you here, this was the site we looked at prior, and we were going to occupy this entire site. Well, there's an easement here for cross access, but there's not one here, and this is an existing space. So had we not negotiated cross access agreements with the neighbor, part of our building would be landlocked, and we definitely don't want that to happen either. We also want to identify any on-site improvements, whether it's buildings or a well or availability of other utilities. And then one of the other pieces here is the soils. So a soil engineering test is a must before you move to construction. You want to make sure that, I'm going to say, the elephant isn't buried in the middle of your site. Likewise with the phase 1 environmental. We've identified sites in the past that looked great on paper, looked great visually. There was some concern with the content of the soil or the stability of the soil, and upon doing an engineered test, soil test in a phase 1 environmental research, we not only discovered that there was trash and debris dumped 10 feet under the ground, that it completely would kill a deal, that we would have to remove over 30 feet deep of this soil to remove all of the waste and byproduct that was dumped underneath visual inspection. So again, it's a very small price to pay for a very large amount of insurance for your project. So I mentioned to you guys that the construction component on GroundUp Construction is much more detailed. There's just a couple more components that go into this. So consideration for GroundUp Construction. One thing that a lot of people forget about or don't really put a lot of thought into is the design team selection and negotiation. We like to treat our design team selection and negotiation much like we do with our general contractors. We want to make sure that we not only vet them out to make sure that their personalities match our clients, but that our clients also match their personality, or that they can extrapolate the needs and the vision of our client onto paper and into actuality. Likewise, we want to negotiate. Many cases we're able to negotiate, I'm going to say this tongue-in-cheek, but 10 or 20% in some cases when you put architect against architect or design professional against design professional. They become just as competitive as a lot of the general contractors can become. We also like to conduct the pre-bid conference on-site. We mentioned that we do the pre-bid conference on-site within an existing space. We want to do this as well on a ground-up project. We'll also comprehensive analysis of bid and scopes of work. So taking the general contractor's bids, looking for anomalies, continually pushing for more competitive pricing is a must. Initial design considerations and value engineering suggestions with the design team. So early involvement with a management team in this process, maybe it's from inception of the real estate acquisition, but early involvement allows this team or us to be active with the value engineering suggestions. Being that we've done this before and that we've seen these done many, many times, there's a lot of times where architects' vision or their architectural license, their artistic license, gets in the way of some practicality situations. Maybe it's material availability, maybe it's the sub-base in the market to install this type of material. Maybe it's not available, but on paper it's beautiful. And we move to construction and realize not only does it cost 3 times the amount we thought it was, there's no one in Texas that will install it, and we have to bring someone in. That has happened, and it happens often. So we want to make sure that is our involvement or the project management team's involvement is there. Regular site visits to monitor construction progress and conduct, we call OAC, owner, architect, and contractor meetings. A project management team really is your time resource. Attending these meetings on your behalf or alongside of you, become your advocate, your expert on site, able to identify job site situations, possible remedies. Maybe it's architectural design or maybe it's construction remedies. Being on site during these meetings allows us to be able to avoid some of those problems. Change orders fall into this very quickly. And change order is an ugly word. I don't think any of us on this phone call like to talk about change orders, but it's a necessary evil. The good part about having an experienced team on your side is to be able to delineate what's actually needed, maybe what's excessive, or maybe even be there to tell you that this change order is completely validated and that we should move forward with that. So in any one of those situations, the advocacy and the ability to analyze those change orders is huge. And then assisting in the ongoing value engineering options. We'll say there's more than one way to skin a cat. In this situation on site, there's a lot of different ways to approach problems or situations to save money. And then the third scenario is the renovation of current practice. I know a lot of you are probably considering this now. This picture happens to be one that I've done in my past life. It was a pediatric dentist's office, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more detail here. So demobilization is a really big one, and I think what happens when you talk about the renovation of a current practice or space is there's a lot of questions, and you may not even know where to start. So obviously the demobilization, and we're going to say, here's some general questions for you. How long will the project take? Have you considered if you'll shut down completely? Are you going to continue to operate while construction's going on? And what in the world am I going to do with my staff? Are they going to work part-time? Or are we going to coordinate this during a holiday? A lot of times that is a very tough question. Not to mention logistical considerations. For instance, how are we going to remove this equipment, especially if we're doing this in phases? Where will we store these items during construction? So when I say where will we store these items during construction, that ties directly into coordination with the landlord. Too often you have these plans, maybe you've taken some of these steps, you've decided, here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in phases. I'm going to store it all in the Connex box or storage container like you see down here with the forklift. You get it all done, you get it out in the parking lot, and the landlord comes to you and says, what in the world are you doing? You're not allowed to do that. City might have given you a permit to do it. Everything could be copacetic, but then the landlord makes you remove this container, and what in the world are you going to do now? That's a very minor problem that could probably be dealt with, but that's just the beginning of the situations that can be started and then avoided without consulting the landlord. Hours of operation for construction. A lot of times you have to worry about your neighbors, of course. And then are there any allowances that the landlord might be willing to give you? And how would those allowances or reimbursements be paid to you? So I'm going to give you an example of the one that I showed you the picture of. I mentioned I happen to be a pediatric dentist. They had some vacation time that they took every year, whether it was spring break or during summer, that they shut down for a week at a time. This particular client made the decision to do this in phases. They started with the back of house first, and there was a 2-week process. So part of this negotiation with us was working through the evening hours so that we could maximize the construction time. That kind of goes into timing considerations. Will the GC operate after hours? Many cases they will not. Many cases they will. But if you don't ask and you move to construction, that creates many, many, many problems. Not to mention, can they perform the work in the time allotted? And then what assurances do you have in place? We fortunately finished the project in the time frame that was allotted, and everything worked out great. But I can tell you that the contracts we negotiate today with most of our general contractors have liquidated damages for excessive time or time after the completion schedule. So that's an insurance policy for you, but then also we would be doing you a disservice not asking you if you have a contingency plan in place. So that can mean monetarily, or that can even mean time. And if you don't think about contingency plan and how you'll maneuver through that situation, if the project goes over on time, we would be doing everyone a disservice. So staff, of course, staff and clients. How do you deal with your staff and your clients during the construction process? Alerting your clients of the construction, the inconvenience of construction while you're in operation, the mess, the dirt. There's a lot of things that have to be considered. So all of these things, I think, come from prior preparation and planning within the project scope, and making sure that you are all aware of the hurdles and pitfalls that can be avoided as we go forward. So really, in summary, I think if you have a plan in place, that's the most important, how you start and where you start. And then having a great team or experienced team behind you to support you and facilitate you through the process, many of these hurdles can be avoided. I have a slide here with my contact information, and I encourage you all to reach out to me if you would like to at your convenience. Typically, if you just email me, I can respond to you very easily. And I also have my cell phone number here, so feel free to reach out to me on that as well. I will also be at the TDA meeting in San Antonio on May 5th. I'll be attending the roundtable that morning. And then I'll be at the Xite booth, which is booth 826 for the rest of the day, Thursday. And I'll be departing Thursday evening back to Dallas. So feel free to stop by. We'd love to see you. We'd love to talk to you. Maybe we can do a little follow-up. If you have any specific questions on projects that you're considering now, we'd love to talk to you about that. And I'm going to open the floor, and Josh, you might correct me here, but I'm going to open the floor to questions and answers, and I will turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. Actually, we had a question earlier, and what's a good number of spots per square foot? That was from Dr. Khan.
Per square foot, let me kind of give you an example. So if we're talking about a 2,500 square foot space, we typically say around 5 spots would be good, with hygiene and all the other areas that you would need. Give me 2 seconds here. Yeah, I'd say about 5 per 2,000 feet.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Johnny? Okay. Well, again, we will basically, see if we can get a couple more questions. We have a little bit more time, so definitely feel free to provide a question, and we'll definitely answer it.
Okay, perfect. And like I said, I'm completely available.
Yeah, Johnny, we definitely appreciate your attending, your webinar. We definitely appreciate your time and valuable information. TDA members, we also appreciate your time as well. And as a remember, all of our webinars are going to be archived on the PERCS website, so you'll have a chance to review this webinar at your convenience. Additionally, you can contact us at www.tdperks.com, or you can give us a call at 512-443-3675, and we'll be able to direct you to all of our 25 plus endorsed vendors, and especially Xite. And again, I hope to see you all next week in San Antonio. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Take care.